One summer morning in 1997, a little girl vanished during a family camping trip in the Rockies. Authorities called it a tragic accident. The case was closed, the search abandoned, but her mother never stopped looking. 18 months later, a broken whisper from a hospital bed cracked the silence, and what followed unraveled a buried nightmare. Michelle Ellery jolted awake at 3:16 a.m., gasping for breath, a cold sweat clinging to the back of her neck. In her dream, or perhaps a false memory, she heard her daughter's voice calling, "Mommy." A whisper, thin as mist but cutting as a knife. She was no longer sure if she'd truly heard it, or if it was just a product of her endless sleepless nights. But each time that call returned, it carried something like a message. Outside, snow blanketed the rooftops, gusts of wind clawing at the bedroom window panes like the talons of a mad beast. In the darkness, the room became a frigid space, not from the weather, but from the absence of a loved one. Michelle pulled herself from the thick blankets, her feet touching the icy wood floor like a stark reminder. She was still alive, still in pain. She walked toward the white wooden door at the end of the hallway. Lila's room. The brass doorknob felt cool to the touch. Michelle opened the door so softly, as if afraid to wake a spirit. Inside, everything was just as it had been the day Thomas drove Lila away on their camping trip. Michelle stood in the middle of the room, doing nothing, just breathing in and feeling the emptiness growing in her chest like a black hole. She had tried to put everything away, had tried to close this door forever, but then she would open it again and look again, like a self-imposed punishment or a ritual of remembrance. Then Michelle went into Thomas's old study, a place she hadn't dared to enter for a long time because she was afraid that when she saw the things left behind by the husband she'd shared a pillow with, she wouldn't be able to bear it. It was a small room with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling, an old oak desk, and a drawer locked with a combination code. She still remembered the code, their wedding date, 1105. The click sounded dry and hollow, like an acknowledgement that something was still unfinished. Inside the drawer, among construction documents and property bills, was a hand-drawn map. Not an ordinary tourist map, but a sketch Thomas had made himself. Trails, elevation markings, and 3 red dots marked with a blue ballpoint pen. In the right-hand corner was a line of writing, Option 2, Avoid Tourist Routes. Michelle frowned. She remembered Thomas saying their route would pass through the eastern side of the national park, where there were tourist trails, ranger stations, and even cell phone service. But the 3 red dots were on the western side, bordering a remote area rumored to be a haven for illegal lumberjack camps. Why would Thomas go that way? She continued to search. In a small box at the bottom of the drawer, she found a soft leather notebook, thin, the kind Thomas used for notes when he was on distant construction sites. Opening the first page, his familiar handwriting appeared. Day 2. Calvin is acting strange. Keeps looking around like someone is watching. Michelle flipped through the pages, her heart pounding. Near the end, the handwriting began to tremble slightly, as if the writer was worried or writing in haste. 2:17 a.m. Hear something outside the tent. Open the zipper. See Calvin standing outside, looking into the forest. Ask him, he says, just a dream. But I see headlights, and I see someone carrying Lila away. Calvin says I'm dreaming. Michelle couldn't read any further. Her hands shook, her mind reeling. Emotions crashed against her chest like a tidal wave. Thomas had seen something. He knew something was wrong. He had tried to write it down, tried to warn her, but all this time, she had been completely unaware. A thick silence descended on the room. Michelle sat there, listening to her own breathing mingled with the ticking of the wall clock that had been running slow since last year. She felt as if she were being pulled back to that night, but this time, it wasn't a nightmare. This time, it was a memory borrowed from her lost husband. Michelle wiped away her tears, lifted the notebook, staring at the pages as if wanting to etch every ink stroke into her skin. Too late to save her husband, but perhaps not too late to save her daughter, and she knew where she should start. The Denver Rehabilitation Hospital stood on a gentle slope, backed by a ridge of pines with a snow-dusted parking lot in front. Nothing here suggested life, only the smell of antiseptic, the quiet footsteps of nurses, and the soft hum of respirators droning through the night. A place for bodies that weren't quite dead, but couldn't return to normal life either. Michelle arrived unannounced. She carried a moss-green bag, inside which was hidden an old Sony recorder that Thomas used to use to record work ideas. Outwardly, she looked like an ex-wife still concerned about her brother-in-law after a tragedy. But inside, Michelle was taking the pulse of memory, searching for the first crack in a wall sealed shut with lies. She was led to room 213A. Calvin lay there, a faded version of himself, his beard scruffy, his eyes blankly staring at the ceiling. He had a long scar behind his left ear, where a craniotomy had been performed to relieve pressure after the accident. The doctor said he was partially conscious, but his cognitive functions had not fully recovered. In other words, he couldn't testify, couldn't be tried, and couldn't be questioned. Michelle pulled a chair closer, placing the bag at her feet. She didn't say anything. Calvin breathed steadily. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes blinked slowly. Sometimes his eyelids twitched, as if he were dreaming. Michelle sat still. Each hour passed like an experiment in patience. She observed every movement, every muscle twitch, every unintelligible whisper. When the clock read 3:47 p.m., Calvin began to mumble, not loudly, not coherently, but with a rhythm. They said, "You're pretty, like a Japanese doll, like in old movies. Not hard to sell. Not my fault. Thomas. Thomas knows." Michelle leaned down, switched on the recorder. The familiar static buzzed in the bag, so quiet that only she could hear it. She continued to sit like that, pretending to read a magazine while Calvin drifted deeper into delirium. Words repeated, interspersed with moans like someone with malaria. Pushed him. Rolled. Blood. Not waking up anymore. It's over. Empty. Empty. Michelle left the hospital at 10 minutes to 5, the sun just sinking behind the mountains. Snow hadn't started again, but the sky was stained a strange dark purple, like an old, unresolved bruise. Back at her small apartment in Denver, Michelle made herself a cup of black coffee, no sugar. She used to not drink coffee in the evening, but since Lila disappeared, sleep was a luxury, and caffeine became her companion. She opened the recorder, rewound it, then pressed play, listening in the dark. First, the background static, then the breathing, the soft scratching against the bed frame. Then that voice, a familiar voice, but now sounding like someone distorted from within. They said, "You're pretty, like a Japanese doll." Michelle stopped, rewound, listened again. Calvin's voice didn't tremble, didn't falter as often as it should in someone simply delirious. At times, the words were strangely coherent. "Thomas knew. He told me. Don't get involved. But I needed the money. They said they'd only take the kid. You understand? I just gave them the opportunity." Michelle clenched her fist, her palm slick with sweat. No longer a vague feeling. This was a confession, a small piece of the truth, leaking from a place beyond the reach of justice. The next morning, in her dark brown coat and scarf, Michelle parked in front of the police headquarters. The wind whistled through the glass. She sat there, as she had done so many times. Not out of fear, because she knew she held evidence in her hands, not enough to convict or uncover the whole truth, but at least enough to make the police reopen the case. But all she got was like a bucket of cold water thrown straight in her face. "Mrs. Ellery, we did everything we could. No sign of foul play. This case is closed. I understand your pain, but..." Michelle didn't respond. She just looked at the policeman in front of her with eyes that were no longer wet, but deeply cold and silent. Then let me be blunt. If you don't reopen the case, I will. I don't need guns. I don't need authority. I just need the truth. And I will find it, with you or without you. Then Michelle turned her back, leaving behind a stifling room where the long silence had just cracked, little by little. She opened her laptop, typing a name that had been in her memory for over a year. Ray Monroe, freelance journalist, specializing in cross-border crime. Michelle had heard him on local radio during a discussion about missing children near El Paso. He spoke bluntly, even rudely, but his voice had the anger of someone who had witnessed real victims. She found his email, then hesitated, writing something that might make him care, without him thinking she was a crazy mother, so desperate that she imagined everything. She began to type, "Dear Mr. Monroe, I am the mother of a girl who disappeared last year near Rocky Mountain. Her name is Lila Ellery. The case was closed as an accident, but I believe it is not that simple. I have a recording of a witness, my brother-in-law, the survivor of the accident, during his delirium in the hospital. He mentioned selling the child, saying that his brother, my husband, knew, but was pushed. I don't believe this is just delirium. I need someone who dares to listen and isn't afraid. If you want to know more, I have the recording." Michelle sent it before she could regret it. Immediately afterward, she turned off the lights, sitting alone in the darkness, her hand clutching the recorder as if it were the last piece of evidence she held. The tape still buzzed in her head, the broken words, the mismatched pieces. Thomas, not waking up anymore, had to do it. They promised it wouldn't hurt. She knew, from the moment that email was sent, there was no turning back. Michelle Ellery, an accountant, a mother, a widow, had stepped into a maze that she didn't know where it would lead. But she knew one thing. If the truth was buried in the mumbles of someone half dead, she would be the one to translate it for the world. And this time, she wouldn't let anyone say, "The case is closed" again. El Paso was a city perched between the desert and the border, where sunlight pierced through the golden dust to glaze everything, from the faded signs of photo shops to the tattered wanted posters plastered on the windows of police stations. It was like a buffer zone between two worlds, American enough to be familiar, but wild enough for everything to disappear without a trace. Michelle Ellery arrived on a dry February afternoon in a silver rental car. She had driven from Denver for 8 hours straight, stopping only to refuel. On the passenger seat was a brown leather bag containing the recorder, a copy of Thomas's journal, and a map of missing children that she had printed from the websites of charitable organizations. She wasn't here to be consoled. She was here to hear someone who dared to look the truth in the eye. And Ray Monroe didn't disappoint her. He opened the door to his second-floor apartment with a wary expression. He was in his late 40s, tall and thin, with grizzled hair and an unshaven beard that made him look more like a weary explorer than a journalist. The room he led Michelle into was cramped, the walls covered with maps, diagrams of bus routes, and dozens of Polaroid photos pinned haphazardly, each photo a child's face under the word "missing" in red. Ray placed a cup of coffee on the table, the sound of the cup touching wood echoing softly in the uncomfortably silent room. Michelle sat opposite him, her gray coat still not fully removed, her hands clasped together as if only that could keep her calm. On the table was the tape. The old tape Michelle had recorded from Calvin's delirious ramblings. They had listened to the passage 3 times. Each time, Michelle only felt her chest tighten. Ray leaned back, sighing. "I'm not sure. But the way he says, 'You're pretty like a Japanese doll,' then mentions Thomas, and had to get rid of him. It's not nonsense. Do you think he remembers? Maybe. Or maybe his subconscious is surfacing something he's trying to bury." "So what do you have in your hands?" Ray asked, his voice cautious. "I need to know everything, not feelings, but something that can be held on to." Michelle opened her bag, placing a small recorder on the table, an old, scratched black plastic type. Next to it was a notebook, thick and worn, its spine broken, and an old photocopy of a handwritten page. "This is my husband's journal," she said, her fingers resting lightly on the paper. The last page, he writes, "Calvin acting strangely. We'll talk when I get back." Ray read quickly, his eyes narrowed. "And the recording?" Michelle nodded. "I recorded it secretly when I went to the hospital. Calvin was delirious, but clearly says words like doll, them, and Thomas knew. Had to get rid of him." Ray sat still. He didn't take notes, just looked at Michelle for a moment, as if weighing not what she said, but how she said it. "Do you have anything else?" "Just a gut feeling," Michelle replied, breathing softly. "And the silence of too many people." Ray was silent for a moment. Then he pulled his chair closer, opened a drawer, and took out a neatly folded wall map. "I'm not sure about Calvin, but I'll believe you, and we'll investigate in that direction." He opened the map, a map of the southwestern United States, filled with small red dots in ink. He didn't need to say it, Michelle guessed. "Each dot is a disappearance?" she asked. Ray nodded. "In the last 8 years, children, mostly girls, similar age to your daughter." He pointed to a dot near Tucson. "July last year, a week before your daughter disappeared, girl with a pink water bottle with dolphins on it." Michelle paused. Ray looked at her, then said slowly, "If Calvin was involved, he couldn't have done it alone. And I need to know exactly. Where was he? Who did he meet? For how long after the accident?" Michelle thought for a moment. "He was taken back to Denver, Memorial Hospital. I can find the name of the nurse who cared for him." Ray sat up straight. "Good. You find that person. I'll review the Greyhound station cameras in Tucson. If anyone ever took a child through there." Their eyes met. For the first time since entering the room, Michelle saw clearly. Not pity, but commitment. Michelle knocked on the administrative office door at Memorial Hospital early Monday morning. Ray stood beside her, his coffee already cold in his hand, dark circles under his eyes after a third sleepless night. The woman who opened the door was an elderly woman, her gray hair neatly tied back, glasses hanging around her neck on a chain. She looked at Michelle for a moment, then said softly, "Ellery, I remember you. You used to come here to ask about Calvin Ellery that year, didn't you?" Michelle nodded. "I need to know who visited him after the accident, if there are any visitor logs or lists." The woman looked around the hallway as if afraid someone would hear, then lowered her voice. "I shouldn't show you, but there's an old copy I keep separately because there was something strange about it back then. One day, 2 people came to see the patient, but didn't leave their names." Ray stepped forward. "We don't need the entire record, just that one entry, date and description." She nodded. "Wait for me a moment." They waited outside the hallway, the familiar smell of disinfectant bringing Michelle back to the memory. She remembered sitting for hours in the waiting room, watching Calvin unconscious behind the glass, alone with her helplessness. 40 minutes later, the woman returned. She handed over an old notebook, its spine torn, the dated page clipped with brown tape. Michelle read slowly. July 27, 1997. Visitors, 2. Description, woman, long brown hair, short man, wearing a baseball cap. Did not provide names, stayed for about 20 minutes, did not leave paperwork. Ray glanced over. "Are there hallway cameras?" The woman shook her head. "Back then there were only in the main area, not in the special ward. But if they came from out of state, they may have taken a bus or rented a car." The 2 spent the next day at the old Greyhound station in downtown Denver. Ray flashed his press badge. Michelle pretended to be a research student. The staff here had changed a lot, but one old photo store employee, Joe, a former security guard, now watching security cameras, remembered something. "I'm not sure, but it seems like that month there was a short, stocky guy, wearing a leather jacket, going in and out several times, wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses all the time, even in the early morning." I thought he was photosensitive. Ray winked at Michelle. Which way did he go? Down to Tucson. Ray turned to her. Do you still have any photos of Lila from before the trip? Michelle opened her wallet. The picture of the girl smiling, holding a dolphin water bottle was something she always kept with her. Joe nodded slowly. That girl. I'm not sure, but I think I saw the child standing close to the bus door once. She seemed to be holding something pink. Michelle nodded softly, her voice choked in her throat. If it was her, then she was here, only a few hours away from me. Joe leaned back, sighing, the sigh of someone who had seen too much and couldn't do anything. I can't be sure, Mrs. Ellery. Hundreds of children pass through every day. But there was something in that girl's eyes. It wasn't like a child traveling with her parents. Michelle didn't say anything else, but Ray stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Joe's shoulder. We don't need to be sure. We just need a reason to keep going. Leaving the bus station, it was late afternoon. The first snow of the season fell lightly on the asphalt, each small flake like paper ash. Ray stuffed his hands in his pockets, walking beside Michelle without saying anything for a long time. Finally, he said, Maybe I was wrong to think this was just a missing person case. It's bigger than that. Michelle turned to him, her eyes not leaving the photo in her hand. And I was right to think, someone is still taking Lila away from me, every hour. The wind rose in the distance, carrying away some scraps of paper from the parking lot. They turned back to the car. In Michelle's hand, the picture of the girl with the pink water bottle was still there, blurred but real. The evidence was no longer in a vague memory. It had a shape, a face, and a trail. 3 days after the meeting in El Paso, Michelle woke up to the shrill ringing of the landline at dawn. On the other end, Ray's voice rang out, hoarse but urgent, as if speaking from behind a door that had just been cracked open. Check your email. I just received something. It could be the turning point in the case. Michelle jumped out of bed, her cold feet touching the wooden floor. She hadn't had time to brush her hair or drink water, her hands already shaking as she typed the password to unlock her laptop. The connection was slow, but the email had arrived. RE:*Greyhound photo-Tucson. Attached was an unnamed JPEG file. Michelle's hand tightened on the mouse, clicking to open the file. A black and white image appeared, slightly grainy like a photo from an old security camera. The scene was outside the Greyhound bus station, the sidewalk full of car oil stains and metal trash cans. In the middle of the frame were two figures, a short, stocky man with a baseball cap pulled low to cover his face, and beside him, a little girl. The girl wore a baggy coat, the sleeves too long, covering almost all of her small hands. But what made Michelle hold her breath was not the face, half covered by hair, but the thing the girl was holding. A pink water bottle with a twist-off cap, a worn strap with a bit of dirt smeared on it. Michelle leaned closer to the screen, her hands braced against the desk. That bottle, not just similar. It was exactly her bottle. The cap was chipped in a small corner that Thomas had taped with white tape. Michelle remembered every curve, every small scratch from being dragged on the ground during Lila's first picnic at age 6. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything for the first few minutes, just a silence exploding in her chest, as if her heart knew before her brain could understand. Lila. She was alive, somewhere, walking in the world, holding a piece of her stolen childhood that she had never let go of. The phone rang again. Ray. I just verified the source of the photo, he said as soon as she answered. Not from a security camera like I thought. An amateur photographer, freelance artist, likes to record the streets of Tucson in the early morning. He sent it to me after I posted a search for images of missing children in that area. Michelle asked, her voice hoarse. Does he still have the original file? Yes, and more. He remembers the exact location of the photo. That afternoon, they met at a small coffee shop near 6th Avenue. The photographer was Lester Quinn, thin, disheveled hair, wearing a denim jacket with band badges. He brought his old analog camera, opened a larger print of the photo. "I took it early in the morning on January 18th, Lester said, pointing to the timestamp under the photo. "The light was strange, so I remember. The girl, she stood close to the guy, but her eyes, it wasn't like a child with a relative, as if she wanted to disappear from her own body." Michelle didn't take her eyes off the photo. "Did you notice which car they got on?" "Not clear. I was busy shooting, but after that I remember they went towards the parking lot behind the station. I even passed the old warehouse where the trucks usually park. There was almost no one around at that hour." Ray immediately opened the map, pointing to the location. "That's the Brawley industrial area, about 4 empty warehouses once belonging to a bankrupt transportation company. Rumor has it that human traffickers now use it as a temporary holding place before moving goods." Michelle heard the words, "moving goods," and felt a cold pang in her heart. Ray sighed, pushing the map toward her. If she's there, she may have been moved already, but who knows? Who knows she hasn't had time? Michelle jumped up. "We have to report it to the FBI." Ray nodded. "I did, but you know the process." A day later, they were called to the FBI branch office in Tucson. They were greeted by Agent Celeste Halbrook, female, about 40, wearing a gray suit, her eyes as sharp as a pair of daggers. She listened to Michelle and Ray's presentation, then flipped through the photos, maps, and recordings. "We appreciate the collection efforts," Celeste said, her voice as even as a machine. "But this image is not enough to prove kidnapping or unlawful detention. No clear face, no time verification, and the warehouse is private property. Without a search warrant, we cannot raid it." Michelle stiffened. "You're saying not enough reason to find a child who may be imprisoned?" Celeste looked straight at her, her voice unchanged. "We cannot act on emotion. Even if I believe you, which I don't say I don't, we need clearer evidence." Michelle wanted to slam her hand on the table, but she just sat quietly, her hands gripping the seat until they were white. Ray placed his hand lightly on her hand, as if to reassure her, but Michelle knew he was just as angry. When they walked out of the FBI building, the sun was near the horizon. Michelle stopped, reaching up to push her hair back, her eyes half closed. "I know she's alive, Ray. I don't feel it. I know it." Ray lit a cigarette, looking up at the old warehouse. "Then we'll find another way. They won't get away with it forever." In the evening shadows, Michelle nodded, her eyes no longer just containing pain, but something else, belief, for the first time after a year of being buried in ashes. The scenery changed as evening descended on the southern edge of Arizona. No longer the lush greenery of Colorado, no longer the quaint houses of Boulder. Here was just reddish-brown earth, jagged rocks and dry grass, desolate as if nature itself conspired to make everything disappear easily. In the distance, the border appeared like a crooked stitch between 2 pieces of fabric, one side America, one side Mexico, and in the middle, things that were not recognized on either side. Ray Monroe was driving. In the passenger seat, Michelle clenched her hands in her lap, watching every change in the dusty road. They were heading towards Nogales, a border town Ray had described as where people only speak softly when they're about to do something big. Today was one such thing. "Information from my people says a shipment will move tonight," Ray said, as the car turned onto the old trail leading to the abandoned industrial park. "Not ordinary smuggled goods, live goods." Michelle swallowed. Even though he had explained it clearly many times, she still found those words chilling to the bone. They weren't alone. Sitting in the back seat was a woman with short brown hair, small in stature but with eyes as sharp as a box cutter. Elena Torres, a former FBI agent, one of the first to suspect a human trafficking ring across the Arizona border, but forced to take a temporary leave after violating investigation procedures. In other words, she dared to go too far. And now, when those limits were protecting the bad guys, Michelle was grateful that Elena hadn't changed. "Elena has collected a series of suspicious license plates around the disappearances," Ray said, as the car parked temporarily on the edge of the forest. Elena took out a file, flipping through it quickly. There are 27 license plates I've been tracking for 2 years. 9 of them have appeared repeatedly near the child disappearances. She gave Michelle a photo reprinted from a gas station camera last July. This is at a small town near Rocky Mountain Park. Take a closer look. Does it look familiar? Michelle looked down. The gas station. An old brown pickup truck, its body covered in mud, parked near the pump. The photo was blurry, but the license plate, 2CVD-973, made her heart sink. She whispered, "At that time, this car was often near my family's car in an unusual way. I remember it clearly, because once Lila pointed and said it was dirty like an earth monster." Elena paused for a few seconds. That car belongs to someone named Santiago Mejia, suspected of smuggling people across the border illegally, but never arrested. Ray nodded. "Tonight we'll see if he shows up." The warehouse area was about 3 miles from downtown Nogales, hidden behind a low, grassy hill. There were 4 warehouses, all empty on paper, but still seeing cars coming and going at odd hours. They parked nearly 100 meters away, behind a dry cactus bush, binoculars in hand, their breath held like the whistling wind. The clock struck 10:11 p.m. A small white truck rolled in, its headlights off. A short man stepped out, walking with a slight limp, opened the door to warehouse number 3, then waved his hand to signal. A small container, the kind used to transport perishable goods, was backed in. No one said anything. Just the sound of tires squealing when braking. Ray took pictures continuously. Elena recorded with a directional microphone. Michelle didn't take her eyes off. After 5 minutes, the man came out, said a few words to the truck driver. No one heard clearly, but suddenly Michelle frowned. The wind changed direction. She heard a noise, very small but unmistakable. Children's voices. She squeezed Ray's hand. "Do you hear anything?" Ray stopped, tilting his head. Then all 3 heard. The creaking of metal, then a gasp. Then, breaking out of the quiet night, the voice of a little girl. Michelle didn't have time to think. She wanted to rush out. But Elena held her shoulder tightly, whispering urgently, "No. If you come out, everything will fall apart, and we will never find her." Michelle bowed her head, covering her face with her hands. She didn't know if that voice was Lila's, but that tone, that way the words were uttered incompletely, sounding like a broken breath, was something a mother couldn't fail to recognize. She bit her lip, tears welling up, but remained silent. In that darkness, her heart beat furiously, not out of fear, but because for the first time, Lila was not just an image in her memory, but a child alive, breathing, calling her, from the other side of a cold metal door. Not until nearly midnight was the container pulled away. Elena recorded the license plate. Ray followed the car from a distance in a second car. While Michelle was taken to safety, her heart twisted as if torn in two between motherly instinct and investigative reason. She didn't sleep. She just sat by the window, her hand placed on her coat pocket, where she kept the small pink plastic water bottle she had bought to match Lila's. She closed her eyes. In her head still echoed that trembling call. The scene at the warehouse in Nogales had completely changed as the June night fell again. No longer the silent, dark place of the previous surveillance. Now, it was surrounded by 3 black SUVs without license plates, a small ambulance parked not far away, and people in bulletproof vests moving like pawns preparing for the final game. Michelle stood behind an orange plastic barrier between the mobile fence and the bright yellow lights shining on the iron wall of warehouse number 3. Elena stood next to her, not in uniform but still wearing a connected headset, her eyes glued to the earpiece as if trying to force every word that came out to be true. And Ray was further away, on the roof of an SUV, holding a long lens attached to a camera, part of the press team allowed by the FBI to be present, but not to cross the white line. Team 2 approaching the main door, 15 seconds. The commander's voice rang through the radio. Michelle heard it and felt like someone was counting down in her heart, each beat, each beat. She wasn't allowed to go in. They said she was a concerned relative and should avoid any impact on the scene. But she didn't care. She had been waiting for this moment for nearly 2 years. Every second now was as long as an entire winter. 10 seconds. Elena glanced over, touching Michelle's hand lightly. We have prepared for all possibilities, including the possibility the girl can't speak anymore or… Michelle interrupted, her voice hoarse but resolute. No. She's alive. Definitely. Elena squeezed her hand lightly, not to reassure her, but like a soldier passing strength to another soldier before the battle. 5 seconds. The iron door of warehouse number 3 trembled in waves like a shuddering beast. 3. 2 dots 1 inch. The sound of the door being breached rang out, as cold as lightning tearing across the night. The door burst open with violent force, white smoke spreading out along with hurried footsteps, the word "clear" ringing from many directions. Michelle didn't take her eyes off for even a second. Then, another voice, clearer, echoed from inside the container. We found 4 children. 1 girl is responding. Curled up in the left corner, there are personal items. Michelle held her breath. Pink plastic water bottle, not letting go. Her heart almost stopped beating. The minute after that was as long as a lifetime. The back door of the ambulance burst open. A white-gloved medic stepped out, his face still sweaty from running. He walked towards Elena, said something briefly, then looked at Michelle. His eyes softened, his mouth smiled very slightly. He nodded. Michelle didn't wait. She rushed towards the warehouse door, blocked by 2 FBI agents, but Elena raised her hand. She's allowed. She's the legal guardian. Michelle crossed the gravel, her heart pounding like thunder. The container door was still open. Flashlights shone from all directions, making the space inside as pale as a dream. A nurse was bending over in a corner, gently lifting a child out of the darkness. The girl was trembling, her hair disheveled, her skinny legs unsteady, her hand still clutching the worn pink water bottle. When the light shone on her, she looked up, and those eyes, that look, unmistakable. Michelle dropped to her knees. Lila! She breathed out like a prayer. The girl stood frozen for a second, as if her soul needed a few beats to confirm reality. Then, small footsteps echoed in the suffocating air. She rushed towards the woman with open arms. Mommy! The cry burst out, shattered, no longer a voice, but a breath mingled with tears. Mommy, I didn't dare to dream that you were still alive. Michelle hugged her daughter, so tightly that she was afraid of hurting her, but Lila didn't let go. The two held each other as if they let go, the world would collapse again. No, sweetheart, Michelle choked, kissing her head, tears mingling with sweat. I'll always be here until I find you. Around them, the paramedics slowly retreated. Some bowed their heads. Ray stood not far away, the camera in his hand drooping. He didn't capture that moment. Not for professional reasons, but because that moment belonged to them. A sacred moment that shouldn't be captured by machines, only to be etched in the heart. A few hours later, Lila underwent a preliminary health check in the ambulance. She was slightly malnourished, with many bruises on her hands and feet, but no signs of internal injuries. Especially, and miraculously, her mind was still intact. She still knows her name, her mother's name, a young nurse told Michelle, her voice emotional. When I asked her who she wanted to come first, she just whispered, Mom, just Mom. Michelle hugged her daughter again, this time more gently. No longer the hug of fear of loss, but the hug of return. At dawn, when everyone had gradually dispersed, when the FBI team withdrew from the scene, Michelle and Lila sat together inside the empty ambulance. Outside was the first dawn after the longest night of their lives. Lila leaned on her mother's shoulder, her hand still holding the pink water bottle. "You kept this all the time?" Michelle asked, smiling softly through her tears. "Yeah. Sometimes I was afraid it would be taken. I hugged it when I slept, to remember Mommy." Michelle kissed her daughter's forehead, her eyes shining brightly in the first rays of the new day. "Now I'm here, and you don't need to remember me with anything else. I'll be your new water bottle. Forever." Courtroom number 4 at the Larimer County Courthouse wasn't large, but this morning extra chairs had to be set up, filling the gallery with 2 extra rows of seats. Reporters from Denver, El Paso, even New Mexico were present, pens and recorders at the ready, hidden in their pockets. They hadn't come only because of a murder case, but because the story that seemed to have ended 2 years ago had suddenly returned like a ghost demanding to speak the truth. In the witness chair, Michelle Ellery sat up straight, her hands resting lightly on her knees, her face strangely calm. Behind her, Lila sat with a counselor. She had been excused from testifying due to her health and young age, but she had left a written statement, signed and confirmed, a statement that made the entire room hold its breath when reading the last passage. "I remember the car noise, Uncle Calvin saying, 'Don't look,' then someone else picked me up. I cried, but no one turned back." Calvin Ellery sat on the defendant's bench, his hands on the table, the shiny handcuffs still locked on his thin wrists. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit, his head shaved unevenly, and his eyes were sunken. Looking at him now, he looked more like a harmless man than a beast that had thrown his own brother off a cliff. But Michelle knew better. Monsters didn't need fangs. Monsters often knew how to say, "I only did it out of fear." The trial began with the indictment. The county prosecutor, Denise Kessler, read each charge clearly. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit organized murder, interstate trafficking of a minor, and tampering with a crime scene obstructing federal investigation. The defendant's side, the defense lawyer, was a gray-haired man, looking tired, with an almost visible air of dejection. He argued that Calvin suffered a severe traumatic brain injury in the accident in 1997, leading to cognitive impairment, paranoia, and not fully controlling his actions. "My client doesn't remember what he did," he said, turning to the jury. "And if he does remember, he doesn't understand the consequences of it. This isn't a cold-blooded crime, but the result of an unhealed trauma, both physical and psychological." Michelle didn't blink. She knew those arguments would come. She was prepared. And then each piece of evidence was presented in turn. First was the tape recording, Calvin's voice in a semi-conscious state, repeating the phrase, "They said you're pretty like a doll. Thomas knows." Had to get rid of him. Next was Thomas's journal, presented as personal records before his death. The last page, the shaky words, "Saw headlights." Lila was carried away by someone. Calvin said, "Just a dream." The entire courtroom was silent. Then there was Lila's testimony, read by the prosecutor, each sentence like a scalpel precisely cutting into the shell of deceit. "I remember Uncle Calvin not talking the whole way. I remember him going out of the tent at night. And I remember when I woke up, I was in another car, with strangers. Uncle Calvin didn't save me. He looked at me and turned away." At this point, Calvin roared. He slammed his hands on the table, jumping up. "They would kill me if I didn't do it." 2 police officers pounced, holding him back. He struggled, shouting, "They said if I didn't hand over the girl, they would kill both me and Thomas." Thomas knew everything. I had no choice. The jury looked at each other, not because they thought he was innocent, but because that uncontrolled confession confirmed the crime more clearly than any recording. The judge banged his gavel, declaring a 15-minute recess to restore order. Michelle sat still. She didn't turn away, nor did she bow her head. Her eyes looked at Calvin as if through his gray flesh, seeing again the man who carried Lila when she was learning to walk, who gave her a bottle of wine for their 10th wedding anniversary. And then she understood. All of those things were just masks. Some people aren't corrupted. They choose it from the beginning. When the jury returned, It took less than an hour to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The highest charges, first-degree murder and trafficking of a minor. The sentence, life imprisonment, no parole. Michelle breathed out. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. Elena sat beside her, squeezing her shoulder lightly. You won. Michelle shook her head, her eyes looking up at the ceiling of the courtroom. No, she said softly. I don't need to win. I just need the truth to be heard. When the trial ended, the press poured out like a flock of birds. Flashbulbs flashed, questions pounded. How do you feel? Zrenia, do you forgive Calvin? Zrenia, will you write a book about the case? Michelle walked slowly through the crowd. She didn't answer. But on the 13th step, just as she crossed the stone threshold of the courthouse, she raised her head, not to pose, but to breathe in the sky. The sky that day was very blue. A year after the container door was ripped open and the first light shone on the face of the girl named Lila, the sky in Colorado was once again crystal clear. Not a single cloud, not a single streak of gray. A light wind swept through the ancient pines, blowing the white ribbons tied along the dirt road leading to the newly built memorial, where the forest bordering Rocky Mountain National Park once stood, where Thomas Ellery had been pushed off a cliff, and the little girl had disappeared in desperate silence. But now, the silence had a name, and a voice, and a candle. On the newly erected bronze plaque, small words were neatly engraved, in memory of the children who never returned, and those who never stopped looking for them. Michelle stood in front of the crowd. In her hand was a piece of paper, a speech that had been rewritten 10 times, but this morning she had left it in her bag. She didn't need perfect words. She just needed to say what was true. It all started with a name, Hope from the Trail. A week after the trial ended, Michelle returned to Denver and registered for a nonprofit license. The goal, to support parents of missing children in wilderness areas, especially cases that didn't get media attention. They didn't have much money, only a few $1,000s from anonymous donors, a few articles calling for donations, and handwritten letters sent from distant mothers. You don't know me, one letter wrote, but I also used to stay up many nights just to imagine my daughter being held by someone, being asked her name, being remembered who she was. Michelle read each word, folded it, and put it in a tin box. She called the box the calling box, a place to store the souls that had not been mentioned a second time. Ray Monroe was the first to join the organization as a media advisor. He had spent 4 months completing a long series of investigative articles, titled simply, The People We Didn't Hear. The series not only detailed human trafficking rings, but also exposed the apathy, the inertia of the system. The state employees who pretended not to see, the files that were mishandled, the ranger stations that ignored the danger signals due to lack of personnel. A police chief in New Mexico resigned immediately after the 3rd article was published. 2 state senators spoke out promising to increase funding for regional missing person search centers. But perhaps the most touching thing didn't come from the halls of politics, but from one afternoon when Michelle opened the door of her small office and a woman in her 40s walked in, holding a blurred photo, the edge torn in a corner. "This is Lily," the woman said. "She disappeared when she was 9 years old in Prescott in 1991. Michelle didn't ask why she had come. She didn't need to explain either. The photo, and the look like her own a year ago, said it all. That small room, once where Michelle stored maps and statements, now became a silent meeting place for those left behind, so that together they could create new beginnings. The memorial service was held in June, exactly 2 years after the fateful trip of the Ellery family. Hundreds of people came. Some came from afar, New York, Nevada, El Paso. Some had never met Michelle, but brought drawings, an old shirt, a few birthday cards that hadn't been sent. People erected a statue made of redwood, carved with 3 children holding hands with no faces, no names, no dates. Because as Michelle said, no names because they could be anyone. When the memorial began, Ray was the first to speak. Then Elena, who had officially returned to the FBI and was assigned to the Mountain Missing Persons Unit. Finally, Michelle stepped up. She didn't read the speech. She just held Lila's hand, saying softly, "Once upon a time, there was a child who was taken away in the night, thinking that no one remembered her anymore. But she was wrong." Her voice trembled slightly. "And if my daughter was wrong, then your children could also be wrong. What we do today cannot undo the past, but it can be a light for someone, being swallowed in darkness." She bowed her head. No one applauded, but everyone nodded. As sunset fell on the forest, candles were distributed to each person. Everyone quietly walked towards the wooden statue. Children went first, adults followed. Lila walked slowly, holding the pink water bottle, now with a new cap, to the foot of the statue. She placed the candle down. Her lips were pressed tightly. Then she whispered. No one heard clearly. But Michelle knew her daughter was calling the names of the little friends who had never returned. In the flickering candlelight reflected on her daughter's face, Michelle raised her head. The sky was blue, peaceful, like the day Thomas had promised to take the whole family to see mountain lions. The day he was still alive, the day that everything was still whole. She couldn't go back to that day. But today, she had done the right thing. No one was forgotten. No one had to quietly disappear in dusty files. The Pine Ridge Elementary School was nestled in a quiet neighborhood of Boulder, surrounded by maple trees that changed color slowly with the seasons. The blue-painted iron gates, the tire swings, and the one-story classrooms with wide windows welcoming the sun all had a peaceful and reassuring appearance. Michelle had never thought she would come back here. The last time she held Lila's hand and walked through this gate, she was only 10 years old, her hair braided in two, and her newly bought shoes still had the smell of new leather. That day, she didn't know that. Just a few weeks later, her world would explode. Now, 2 years had passed, and that child, though still small in stature, had passed through a darkness that no child should have to go through. Lila had returned to school, not easily. Therapy sessions, nightmares, the shrinking every time someone touched her shoulder unexpectedly. But she was resilient. And Michelle, like a gardener, quietly caring for a battered seedling, was there, day after day, just to make her daughter believe that she deserved to be loved and was not the kidnapped child, but a survivor. Today was the Inspiration Presentation, an annual activity for 5th grade students. Michelle received an invitation from Lila's teacher a week ago. In the letter, the teacher wrote, "Lila said she had prepared for that session for a long time, but she just wanted you to sit in the last row. No need to say anything. Just look." Michelle hadn't slept all night before, because of excitement, because of emotion, because she was afraid she would cry. She arrived early, choosing the right seat in the back of the classroom. On the small podium in front of the whiteboard, students came up one by one. Some talked about football players. Some told stories about grandfathers who had been soldiers. Some just talked about the cat that had helped them get through the COVID quarantine. Then it was Lila's turn. She stepped up, her hair neatly tied back, wearing a simple gray dress. In her hand was a small picture, not a photo of her mother, not a photo of herself, but a piece of paper that had been reprinted. The hand-drawn map Thomas had drawn, the trail leading to the border region. Next to it was a red pen circling the word danger. Lila looked up. People asked me about the most inspiring person. I thought a lot, because I met many good people, Ms. Elena, Mr. Ray, and the doctor who helped me sleep well again. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the classroom, then stopped. But the person who made me want to keep living is my mother. Michelle bit her lip, her hand pressed tightly on her knee. Mom isn't a superhero. She doesn't know how to fight. She doesn't have a cape or a flying car. The whole class chuckled lightly. But Lila didn't smile. She continued slowly. My mom only has one thing. She never gives up, even if no one believes it, even if people say I'm dead, even if it's cold, even if it's dark, even if Mom only has a clue as thin as a hair. She still goes, still looks, her voice choked up. I used to think I didn't deserve to go home. I used to believe I had been forgotten. Michelle's eyes blurred. She couldn't resist anymore. Tears fell silently on her hands. But then, I heard footsteps. I saw my mom for real, not in a dream, not in a memory. Mom found me when the whole world gave up. Lila placed the piece of paper on the podium. She bowed her head. I wish the other friends had someone like that too. No one applauded immediately, because everyone, including the teacher, was wiping tears. After the session, when the classroom was gradually empty, Michelle still sat quietly. She wiped her glasses, took a deep breath. Lila ran over, not saying anything, just snuggling into her mother's arms like she used to. "Are you okay?" Michelle asked softly. "Yeah. Are you crying?" Michelle smiled. "A little bit. But not because I'm sad." "Why is that?" Michelle squeezed her daughter tight. "Because I know your heart has learned to forgive." Lila leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, saying softly, "Forgiving isn't because people deserve it, right, Mom?" "No, sweetheart," Michelle replied, her voice deep. "Forgiving is because we need to move on without carrying stones in our hearts." Leaving, Lila walked side by side with her mother, hand in hand, not needing to hold too tight. The sky that day was blue again. Not the blue of a desperate search, but the blue of a beginning. You have probably been silent in the face of a pain, not because there is nothing to say, but because your heart is not ready to hear it again. If you have read this far, perhaps you also carry a void of something not said, not found, or not forgiven. The story of Michelle and Lila is not just a journey to find a child, but also a journey to reclaim the voice for those who have been forced into silence. We retell this story based on real cases recorded over the years. Names, details, and locations have been changed to protect identities while conveying in a humane and accessible way. Our goal is not just to tell a story, but to provide a moment to reflect, to empathize, and to not forget the lessons between a life full of change. If this story has touched you, please share it via WhatsApp with a trusted friend. Maybe they are someone who has been hurt. Maybe they are someone who is looking for something unclear, or simply, they just need to be reminded that, in this world, there are still sincere voices. Just need someone to listen. We cannot change the past, but we can retell it so that the right things are not forgotten. Send this story. Who knows, somewhere, there is someone waiting to be heard at the moment they need it most.